We're good. Okay. So, so this video recording will be focused on how to put together the project. And I'm going to cover the 4 areas of the project in detail: assess, plan, implement, and evaluate. So follow along. I highly recommend that you pull open your Canvas course and you have it to the module that is all about the project. And so I'm going to be highlighting the project instructions, and then I'll go through each of those. And obviously we break it up throughout the semester, but this video is really to highlight the 4 sections of the project. So I'm going to go ahead and open the instructions. Okay, so before getting started, obviously, you will have talked with your agency supervisor and myself so that you have confirmed what your project is going to be on. And you have to keep in mind that the goal is that it is something that actually meets a lot of requirements. The first one is that it meets a need within the agency, and it meets a need within the community, and then it also, of course, meets the assignment guidelines, which we're going to talk about today. Keep in mind, a lot of us have wonderful ideas that if we had all the money in the world and if we had all the resources in the world that we'd like to do within these agencies, but that's not the real world and it's not how it works. So we have to make sure to balance this with what really can work out best for the agency. And also it should be complementing what's already going on in the community. So before you get started, you have to have that conversation. And then we have 4 specific areas. And the first one is going to be assess, and then we're going to move to plan, implement, and evaluate. And you see those here: plan, implement, and evaluate. Okay, so here's the document that I would suggest that you really bookmark, you highlight, you print out. These are the project guidelines which you're going to be using throughout the entire semester. So we're going to be working on a draft all the way through the semester, and we're going to be breaking it down into different sections. But first we're going to talk about the assess part, and that's this top one here. So you are going to, the assess part, oh, let me get it right. I can't get it perfect. Okay, the assess part is the research part of your paper. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's the research part of your paper. I highly recommend that you go ahead and put it in your calendar that you're going to go to the library and to the writing lab to be able to get assistance with how to write the research paper if you're feeling really nervous or you're getting sweaty when I even say the research part of your paper. But this is APA format. It has to be APA format. And you have multiple sources, and it's going to be written in the research way. So what are you doing here? So first what you're doing is you're describing why this project was chosen. And so I'm going to tell you right now that it's not chosen because you think it's a good idea or you feel like it's a good idea or you believe it's a good idea. Although those things are really nice to know, you're choosing it based on data and facts. So you will be using all of those data and facts to be able to back up why you're doing this. So you need data to say what is the health problem and who is affected. Where is it occurring? So you can think, when I even ask those 3 questions, you can think of all the different data that would help to explain what the health need is. So you'll be explaining what the problem is. So how do you know it's a problem in the community? Again, what you're not going to do is state, I think it's a problem, it seems like it's a problem, I feel like it's a problem, because none of those things are measurable, they're not accurate. So you have to be able to show with data that it's a problem in our community. And you're going to include documentation as to where you have found the data. And again, that's APA format. So you have to have sources to show where you've gotten your information, and you're going to be doing in-text citation based off of the APA format. So some questions that you'll be answering during this are, what data do you have to describe the health problem? So again, who's affected, what age are they, what ethnicity, where are they located? As I said, who's the population that's affected? Is it children? Is it adults? Males, females? Describe who's affected, where the people are located, and why they are affected. So is there risk factors associated with it, and what are those risk factors? Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. Oh, so you can also hold this. Okay. So who's affected, where people are affected, and why they're affected. And again, I can't emphasize enough, this is described through data and not your idea of why. This is not the part of the paper or the part of the class that you will be highlighting things that you think to be true. This is, you have to know it's true with data. So you're going to have at least 3 sources as to where you've gathered the data, and be sure to cite your sources. If you do not cite your sources, in essence, then this part of the paper is not valid. And if you're working in a group, you're going to need to have more than 3 sources. 3 sources is a minimum, and that's definitely for an individual that's working alone on the project. This part of your paper is many pages long. I mean, I say many, let's say it's at least 3 to 5 pages long, depending on what your topic is and if you're working in a group or not. But I'm going to close this section by saying this is the research part of the section. It needs to be written in paragraphical form in the research way of writing, and it is APA citation, and you're making sure to have data within here. A couple tips on how you know that that you're on the right track is that you don't see any personal pronouns such as I or they or you or any personal pronouns. The other thing is that you see lots of numbers or percentages, potentially graphs, charts. That would be another way to include data. So that's the assess part of it. I'm now going to move on to the plan section, which is the second area. There's 4 areas, and here is the plan section. So the plan section is, now we're going to move to something different. We've been writing in research format, so now we're going to be writing in a much more almost outline way. And I would even say kind of how I've written the instructions already, where you see that there's a bullet point and it's bold, and then there's examples under here. Now you can start writing in that format rather than having to do paragraphs. But here's where you're going to state the goal and objective for the project. You're going to have one goal, and then you may have between 3 to 6 objectives. It really depends on what your project is. And this is really describing what you're doing. In the section above that we've just done, we've just said what the problem is, who's affected, and now we're creating a plan for what we're going to do to make a difference based on the health problem. So you'll have one goal, and your objectives will be under it. So remember that you're focusing on the problem you identified in the section above. Be sure to include a time frame as well as a measurement, and how will you know that it's accomplished. I will remind you that we're not new to objective writing. We've done objective writing in your past classes, specifically in 275. So, and we've also done this in a discussion within this class as well. But you have to have the necessary components for the objective. So when you have your basic goal, and the goal is mainly going to have your health problem and the population that's affected, but it's going to be broad for the most part. And then you're going to get into the objectives, and here's where you're going to make sure that you have the necessary components. So within your objectives, you're actually stating what is the action that you're doing, what is the actual activity that we're doing to make a difference within that goal. And within each of the objectives, you have to make sure that we say, again, what is it we're doing, and who are we doing this with? When are we doing it, and potentially by how much? So an example might be that we will be conducting workshops, but again, think about that. When I say workshops, in my mind, I'm thinking of 3. Somebody else may have thought 10 workshops, so we have to be specific. So I'm going to be conducting 2 workshops, which are an hour long. So that's the what, and then I'm going to say to who. So who's it for? Is it for absolutely everybody? Well, what if the topic is on childhood, let's say flu vaccinations for children? Well, who are we really targeting? Because what we're going to talk about would be different based on who we're talking to. So let's say that we'll be targeting parents. So that information, you have to say who's the priority population, because that's going to also help you think about, well, how do you recruit? How do you get that information out? And what type of information do you give? So if you're conducting 2 one-hour workshops regarding flu vaccination schedules for parents within the Mesilla Valley area, and then you say when, because again, when is this happening? We have to be able to have a kind of a checklist of when we're going to do it. So you can say April 15th, by April 15th, or you could put the exact days. And then you also are thinking, well, that's one thing, but what is it we're doing? And you say, well, what's the goal of having these workshops? about flu vaccinations, and it probably would be increase awareness about what the scheduling is for flu vaccinations. So you would say that. And so you'd say 2, increase awareness regarding the flu schedule or the flu vaccination schedule by 10% for the participants. So you can see that that's a lot of information within each one of your objectives. But if we do not get this part right, the rest of the project, I'm not going to soften it any, but it falls apart. So if you don't get that part right, then we're going to really struggle in the rest of the paper. So you've got to make sure that you have objectives that are helping you to meet your goal and that have each of the necessary components of how to write an objective. So let me just reiterate before moving on to the next part of this. 1 goal, and you have between 3 and 6 objectives for the most part. And then each objective has exactly what you'll be doing. So what is it you're doing, for who, when are you doing it, and also how much. Keep in mind that this last part here is really to help you evaluate, did we do what we intended to do? Is this meeting what we have set out to do? Okay, then after that part, and again, I want you to write these just as this is written, because I don't want it to be written in paragraph form where it can be hidden. I want you to be able to be very clean and clear with what your information is. But the next part is going to be a theory. So what theory are you using to plan this project now that we know the information above, which is we know what the health problem is, we know who's affected. Now we have some steps onto what we're going to do with it. But then what's the theory or plan? So we can't, again, just create this on our own. This is a science, and we know that certain things happen because it's been tested based on theories and models. So you will select one theory or model, and you will be applying this theory or model to your objectives, to all the 3 to 6 objectives that you have created. So, for example, you would take the health belief model, and you take the different components within the health belief model, and then you would show how your objective excuse me, how your objectives align within the different constructs within the theory. Speaking of flu vaccination. So what you're going to do for the theory part is you're going to need at least a paragraph or at least a couple paragraphs to describe a basic overview of the theory to demonstrate that you understand it. But then clearly I want you to link your objectives with the different constructs within the theory. All right, so now we have covered the assess part and the plan part, which we're kind of calling that's project part 1. It's the first half of the project. Now I'm going to move on to the second part, which is the implement and evaluate. Well, next I'm going to keep it just like this. So now we feel really good. We have well-written objectives, and again, that's the key. If we don't have well-written objectives, we're going to struggle as we move forward, and you're going to see why. So as we move to implement, remember the implement really is how you're carrying things out, how it actually happens. So this is not just the idea of it, this is really carrying it out so that we can see how the project, how it evolves when you're actually working with people in the community. So you're going to be describing the methods, describe the methods needed for implementation of the project. Identify the different intervention strategies. And again, that's not a new concept. We've done that within 275. We've also highlighted that within this class also. But you have to have multiple intervention strategies that will be used. You're going to things you're going to also talk about is how you recruited people to participate. In this section, you're focusing on how you're going to do it. So, one, what you're going to do is you're going to come up to the plan section here, and you're going to copy those very well-written objectives, and you're going to paste them right here, right in here, and that's going to be your objectives the same. So it's redundant. You'll see that you've just, in the plan section, you've already talked about what those basic objectives are. You're going to stick them into implement, and now under each of them, you will be describing how they're being implemented. So you're going to need to tell me on each one of the objectives, what type of intervention strategy is it that you're doing? So the example that I used above about the objective for conducting a workshop is an education intervention because that's a two-way exchange of information. So I would state, I would bold it and say, this objective is utilizing the intervention type of education strategies. Now, but I cannot have 3 objectives that are all education. So you're going to have a variety. So you keep in mind things like information dissemination, community mobilizing, advocacy, referral, behavioral strategies. But you need to use a handful of different ones so that it is varied, because everybody reacts differently based on what they're doing. You know, you've thought about that. We've all read information and we know it's to be true, and we should be doing something such as eating, 5 to 10 fruits and vegetables a day. It's probably easier if it's provided to us. We're most likely to do that behavior if it's provided to us. So that's something you need to think about. Okay, so 1, make sure that you're defining what type of intervention strategy it is. Number 2 is, how are you recruiting people? In public health, one thing that we're not very good at is marketing and also recruiting. So we can have this fantastic program and it fails because nobody came, because we offered it when everybody was at work. And we didn't ask them, when would it be best to have it? So you need to also talk about that. So how are you recruiting people to participate? Okay, a couple other questions. How are you involving other key partners in the program? I would certainly say we never work alone within public health. We always look for partners. Oftentimes people are already in touch with the people that we want to be in touch with as well. So we say, how can we partner together? How are you involving other key partners? How are you recruiting members, as I said? What ethical considerations are you taking into account? Again, here, this information. We touch on it in 216. Becky has done a fantastic job with that. And you want to think about the vulnerable populations, such as youth and seniors, so you have to have consent. Or even if there's other things to take in consideration, cultural considerations, such as, does information need to be in Spanish? Does it need to be at a different literacy level? The goal is to make every activity, objective that we do really easy or doable for all the participants. It's not our time to show off how smart we are. Do you need to make any culturally sensitive techniques to improve the implementation? So that's under implement. And so under each of your objectives that you, again, have copied from plan and pasted into implement, you will be really showing how do we actually carry that out. All right, then we're going to move down to the last section. This is the 4th section, which is evaluate. So it's, again, you're going to think that I'm repeating myself, but I am. Is you will take the objectives that you have in the plan section and you're going to copy them and you're going to paste them right under evaluate. So this, you're like, well, that looks the same. I have them now in 3 sections. If you have your objectives in 3 sections, you're doing it right. So now you're going to evaluate whether or not your objectives are working. So let's talk about evaluation. So here what I have is that you're going to describe the process and impact evaluation strategies. So if you remember in 275, we talk about, you guys have activities related to evaluation. There's 2 different kinds of evaluation. There's actually 3, and I'm only asking for 2, but process and impact. So let's think about state how the outcome and if the goal and objectives were met. So here you're stating how do you know if the program is or was successful? So think about, how did you gather data? So one thing is to say, oh, well, we would know if the program was successful if we had lower rates of the flu. Well, that's fantastic. But how are we gathering that information? And how do we know that, I mean, that's a pretty lofty goal, obviously. But how will we gather that data? And how did you use it to make changes in the program or to report to the agency or community? So think about these things. I'm going to read through these and then I'll go back and talk about it some more. How are you evaluating if you've met your objectives? Your evaluation must be linked to your goals and objectives. And that's why I'm asking you to paste your objectives within the evaluate section. Under each one of them, this is where you're being very specific about how you're evaluating it. So what is it that we're trying to achieve? And how are you gathering that data? And then potentially, if you have that data, what is it saying? So what data are you gathering? How are you collecting the data? And how will the data be used? So let's use my example again of the workshop for the parents. And we said that the goal was to increase their awareness of the flu vaccination schedule by 10%. So let's say, how are you evaluating if I've met my objectives? Well, let's see, if my objective is to increase awareness by 10%, I first have to find out, how will I know 10%? So I probably need to find out, well, where are they starting from? Some people, what if they have no clue about different ages for the flu schedule? So what I'd have to do is a pre-test. So with my participants within the workshop, I would do a pre-test with basic information or basic questions, maybe 3 to 5 questions. And I would find out exactly where they're starting from. And then we would do the workshop, and then after the workshop, I would do a post-test to see, did their awareness increase by 10%? Or by what percent did it increase? The goal is 10% for me, but it may be different. So, okay, so how are you evaluating if I've met this objective? And I would say I'm using a pre and post test. What data are you gathering? The data I'm gathering is their knowledge and their awareness, really, about the flu schedule at this point. How I'm collecting the data is with a basic survey before the workshop and after the workshop. And then how will the data be used? Well, the data will be used to see if the information given, did it make a difference? Did it increase their awareness? Did it not? Did they already know all this? Maybe they already knew all this. Well, then that means that we don't need to do the workshop anymore. We need to find out what information do they need, or what are other barriers that we need to address. And of course, I would say that I'm going to share this information with my agency and maybe report it out if they have a advisory board meeting, or it depends on what agency you're with. But you're going to do that for each one of your objectives. So let me go back up real quick so I can highlight the point. Back on the very plan section where I say each objective has to have these necessary components. And I hope you can tell that if you do not have the necessary components, such as this number 4, you cannot do the evaluation, because you will say, well, I want people to feel good about their children not getting the flu. How do you measure that? How do you gather that data? What do you do to get that to happen? All of that would fall apart. So this has to be very specific. You should feel a little bit, I hate to say this, but a little bit tense maybe about ensuring that your objectives are written correctly, because this is worth it. If you get this part right, as you can see, these other 2 sections are quite easy to do. And the other thing that you'll notice, and it's very sad that this happens, is that evaluate is the last area within your project. But you cannot wait till the end to do evaluation. So if you don't plan for evaluation at the beginning, you will miss this section. So you unfortunately could have gone through and done some fantastic workshops and then never have gathered the information about, did it make a difference? Did they increase their knowledge about resources? Did they change their behavior? Do they understand how to cook fresh fruits and vegetables? All of those things. But we have to gather the data to see if it's working or if it's not working. It's certainly not worth putting all this time and energy into a program if we don't know that it's going to work. So those are the 4 areas: assess, plan, implement, and evaluate. On the assess section, that is the research part of it. You must have multiple sources of data, and you have to cite them within APA format, and that's your research part. And then you're going to flow into the next 3 sections, which are plan, implement, and evaluate. And within each of those sections, you will be using the objectives for your program, for your project, in each one of the sections, and then you'll be filling it in with all the necessary information. As this course states, we're not teaching you any new information. You are applying everything that you've learned in your past classes. But this is your time to show off the information that you know. So you're going to be turning that information. I'm going to take this to just show you where I have broken it up. That is your full project to how you will accomplish that throughout the semester. But we build upon it. So in the module that you see listed where it says activities, how we break it up is that we build upon it. So first you have a handful of discussions before this that are going to ask you to turn in your goals and objectives, intervention strategies, so that you start already fulfilling some of the details that you're going to need. And then you'll see that you're first going to be asked to turn in project part 1, and in the description you will see it's just asking for the first 2 sections, which is assess and plan. So, as the instructions I have here tell you, you are just turning in assess and plan. And this is turned in about midway through the semester to make sure that we're on track. And it's a draft. I'm not expecting it to be 100%, but 80 and above percent is pretty good. That's where you should be at. Then, after that, you'll be expected to turn in project part 2. And I know you'll be real surprised to know that that's the last 2 sections. And again, in a draft format. And this is going to be turned in, let's say, it's about a month before the semester's over. And that's going to be, you already have done the first 2 sections, and so this is you completing the second 2 sections, and you will be turning them all in together in a draft format. And again, as I said, it needs to be at least 80% complete. You still have time to fine-tune it and to make changes as you're moving along. One more thing that I'd like to highlight on the project. Okay, so we already have where we first turn in the first 2 sections. We have some time to make changes on it. Then we turn in this next, the project itself, the next 2 sections. And then what you're going to do is you guys are going to work together as a team, with a team within each other. So you're going to do a peer review. Each one of you will receive another student's project to provide feedback on. I have a form that you're going to provide feedback on, which is right in here. And so what you're going to do is I will give you a schedule of who your partner is. You will send them your project, and they're going to send yours, and you will read through it and make sure that it is fitting all of the guidelines that we've gone through. And I have to be honest about this again, not that I'm not honest, but I really encourage you to provide as much information as possible. If you do not do this, you're actually not helping your fellow classmate. They will, and everybody across the board will tell you, if you say, oh, looks really good, and then it really does not, you failed them, you haven't helped them. So let's help our classmates to get better. And the other thing is, it's fantastic to read other people's projects, because maybe you realize, oh, I didn't think about that. I forgot to think about, checking the senior centers and seeing if they want to coordinate, or I forgot about ethical considerations and that just reminded me of it. That's not cheating. We're all growing together in this. So you're going to be critiquing, providing feedback to a classmate, and then you're going to give that information to your classmate, and you're going to turn it in for points as well. So I will provide you, of course, more detail about that. There's more detail within this assignment. Then after that, so that's the third thing that we've done on the project. After that, you are polishing it up and you are finalizing it, and now that you have already turned everything in and you know what's expected, you will be getting it ready for your final presentation. So if you go to the very last module, I will give you some tips about this, and then we'll wrap it up. So we have already all semester been building upon the project. You have been fine-tuning, making corrections, additions, and you've just got feedback from your fellow classmates. Now what you're going to do is you have to turn it in electronically, and this is due on the Monday of finals week. And then we will be doing a poster presentation. So you're going to complete a tri-fold poster and provide it. And all it's doing is highlighting the information from your project. It's not any new information. You're really pulling out the key details from your project, and you will be presenting that on this final day for your finals. So you can see it's worth a lot of points. In essence, as we state throughout the course, this course is built on 2 specific things. It's making sure that you successfully complete the project and complete the hours within your agency. And so that's how we wrap up the semester. I will soon be adding some pictures of successful posters to give you an example of what they look like. And of course, you can always come by my office, as I have them in my office for you to see as well. So this video is really to highlight the project, the necessary components of the project, and what's required.